to butcher your introduction, so I'll leave it to you. For everyone who doesn't know you, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Oh, loaded question. So I'm the founder at 42 Agency. Previously, I spent around 12 years in in-house B2B marketing growth roles. 42 Agency, we help B2B SaaS companies with performance branding, rev ops, and demand gen.
Nice, awesome. Let's start with a fun question, right? What's a hot take that you have about B2B marketing? I know in
Too
LinkedIn
too
you're,
many
you're
too many hot takes. I think for 90% of companies, first touch and last touch attribution is more than enough. That's one.
Mhm.
I think despite what we say about doing more content and podcasts, I think Google is still the primary driver for a lot of companies. Like, I don't think, I mean, I might be wrong that there's always exceptions, but you never discover a company through a podcast. You choose to listen to their podcast after you discover the company. So, like,
Interesting.
podcasts have like really terrible discovery. Like, the way you hear about other podcasts is through a current pod. Like I heard about the New York Times Wall Street Journal podcast because I was listening to another podcast by the Wall Street Journal and they were plugging in their,
Mhm.
that's how you hear about different podcasts. So I think like the quality of production matters, but I think it's you primarily discover the company or the brand through other channels, and then you're like, oh, they have a podcast too, cool, I'm going to listen to it. So
Yeah,
I don't think
that's interesting.
I don't have data
Interesting.
to back it up. This is just a hypothesis I have.
No,
Uh,
that makes sense because I think the way I've discovered most of the podcasts is either through, if I think about it, it's mostly through two sources, right? Like either I see some clips on LinkedIn and probably I keep seeing them repeatedly, and most of it is super valuable for me. And I'm like, okay, hey, this is interesting. Let me go check it out. Or I'm probably searching for something, and these folks have probably transcribed it or probably repurpose their podcast into a giant article or something like that,
yeah,
and that ranks, and I discovered through that, and they probably have a link over there, right? Like if
yeah,
I think about my own journey, I think that's how I've discovered most of the podcasts. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, that's my theory. Like, I discovered podcasts through other podcasts or through Twitter,
Mm,
but it's like for a brand podcast, I rarely ever like land on the pod. The podcast is never my first touch. Like,
true.
it's all usually something else, social,
Mm,
organic, something else.
mm,
I think we were in a era of data and growth and all that. I think we're going back to brand, and
mm-hmm.
I've changed my view on brand over the years quite a bit.
Oh, interesting.
Um, I used to be the data-driven direct response kind of person. Like,
Uh-huh.
what is the brand? Brand is just like fluffy bullshit kind of a thing. But
Uh-huh.
now I realize that it's actually very important. And my sort of like how I think about that is that brand ultimately makes everything easier. You get you get more conversions because people are more likely to click your ad because they're familiar with the brand. They get less cost per click. You get more discoverability, like all that stuff.
Mm,
But I think you need to think about the balance of like if you're an early stage company, you shouldn't be focusing on brand. You should be focusing on product market fit and getting more customers because if your company doesn't exist in 6 months, your brand doesn't really matter. So I think
mm,
there's that fine line that people sometimes don't understand. I think this whole, and Ron is going to hate me for this because I know him and I have disagreements on this, but I think when people say media, like B2B, media, whatever, I think
mm-hmm.
it's just top of funnel. They mean top of funnel awareness.
Mm,
I don't think B2B SaaS companies are going to become true media companies in that sense
mm-hmm.
because actual media companies are struggling to monetize their own content. So, like, there's a bit of like, there always be a software company first that monetizes through software, and the media content media thing is just top of funnel awareness.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah, that's just a couple of things.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense, right? Like, I think a lot of the so-called popular media companies that a lot of these software companies kind of own today are usually because they acquired them, right? Maybe.
And I think they're gonna write off. I think they're gonna write them off as bad investments in a couple of years. I think it was a zero interest rate phenomenon.
Oh, okay, that's a hot take.
That's a hot take. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. But why though? Like at least the theory is that like because we've acquired this company and they have this like massive newsletter, we have this like owned media, which is now the popular terminology that everyone's talking about. So if I own my audience, I can keep talking to
I
them,
think
keep
audience
engaging with
and
them.
customers are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I might be tangentially interested in, like, I'll give you an example. Stripe has Stripe Press. They publish amazing books.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of books from Stripe Press.
Mm-hmm.
Will I ever be a Stripe customer myself? Probably not.
Mm.
You know, like, so like I'm part of their audience. I admire their brand. I admire their public, like the books they write, the books they publish.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a very low on the Venn diagram. I think the intersection is really low of people who are your audience and people who are your actually could be your customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think audience is a term we throw around. Nobody actually knows what it means. We just say audience, audience, audience. But we wrote an essay on 42 slash like 2 years ago or something, which is like your audience are not your customers. Like essentially the argument is that anybody could be your audience. My mom could be an audience of this podcast that we're recording because she's interested in listening to what I say. My mom doesn't speak English. That's a separate conversation. But you know, she's the audience. But would she ever buy Revenue Hero? Hell no. She's a you know, like she's not no. So I think it's one of those things where the intersection is really low, and I think there was this money was free. Audience was the big thing. Companies bought these communities and these publications and newsletters. I think they'll struggle to monetize them, and I think they'll struggle to justify that investment. And over time, they'll understand that the people who were the 10,000 newsletter subscribers, they're not our customers. We ran into that with 42 slash. Part of that why we're shutting it down is because we built this audience, but that wasn't translating into customers for the agency business. Yes, I wanted to monetize it in a separate way. I wanted to build a separate business around it, but like that's just my hot, like super hot, spicy take.
Got it. Yeah. That's definitely a hot take for sure. I guess we'll know in a couple of years then.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. So, and with 42 agency, I'm assuming a lot of your clients are B2B SaaS companies that you work with. And from what I know, you do performance marketing, you do RevOps and a whole bunch of things, right? So I'm pretty sure like your customers and your clients are also asking you like, okay, asking you questions about attribution. How do we think about it? I know you talked a little bit about first touch and last touch being enough for most folks. Talk us through that a little bit. Like, what do you generally tell your new customers comes to attribution?
Story. This was when Visible first came on the scene, and this was like when I first started my career in marketing. I used to be on sales calls, and I'd be like, "Hey, how did you find us?" Because I have no idea how to get. And they're like, "Oh yeah, blah blah blah." I'm like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And then Visible came, and we're like, "Oh my god, Visible can give us all this multi-touch, blah blah blah." And then I went to another job, and I think I implemented Visible like 3-4 times in my career, and nobody ever looked at the dashboards. It was just like, oh yeah, U-shaped attribution tells us this. But what does it mean? What are we going to do different given this information? Nobody, we didn't have a single clue what to do with that information. So I think like it's easy to get, like, it's not easy to get the data, but like once you have the data, it's about how you act in the data. And for a lot of times, a lot of people don't know how to action the data. Like, okay, I have a W-shaped model that tells me 25% of credit goes to organic social. So what do I do with that? Like, do I spend more time on it? I don't know. Like, how do I turn that into actionable insights? I don't know. The other thing is, I think as we go towards this world where privacy, cookies, first party, third party, blah, 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 I think what Eric Seufert from Mobile Dev Memo calls deterministic modeling, like you kind of know what happened to a high degree of certainty, that's going to go away, and we're going to go into more probabilistic modeling. So that's more marketing mix modeling, geo test, lift test, like turn off a channel for like 3 weeks. What's the delta? Like you kind of measure what impact it has. So like we did this with a couple of customers where we turned off all ads for 3 weeks. We're like, okay, let's just see what happens. And we saw a significant dip, not just on paid, but like direct, organic, like everything kind of took a nosedive. Now, if we were looking at a deterministic model where we're basing it on UTMs and blah, 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 it would be like, oh yeah, these people are coming from direct. So in theory, it shouldn't have an impact on that. But it did, because there's a lot of other stuff that happens behind the scenes. Somebody might see your ad, they might not revert on the ad, but they might come back 3 months later. We all know that.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna go towards more of those kind of things where it's more like we did a couple of exercises with some of our customers where we built out statistical models for them based on LinkedIn campaign types, based on channels, based on like what is there, and it's not like 100% certainty that we can say certain things, but like to a high degree of probability, we can say that this drives or does not drive opportunities. And it was not as much of what channel, it was just overall in terms of the marketing mix, where do we allocate our spend? Okay, when the probability that this channel is outperforming everything else. So I think we'll go towards more of that. Like there's an 80% probability that LinkedIn is driving opportunities. We can't tell that directly, but based on this data model that we have, that's what we have. Let's go validate it. Let's put 80% more budget into LinkedIn, run this model 6 months later, see what the results say, and see if that compares to what the hypothesis we have. So that's sort of what I think the world will. That's what we'll move towards. That's where I'm placing my bet. But I might be completely wrong. And I'm wearing a Green Data hoodie right now, so they might yell at me for saying this. But...
Interesting. You talked a little bit about marketing mix models. I definitely want to touch a little bit on that a little bit later. Because of all the different data points and the different models that you have, you shape all the different models that's there. That's one side of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
On the other side of the spectrum, now everybody is talking about self-reported attributes, like that's the holy grail and all the stuff. What's your take on that? I remember. I think you posted recently on LinkedIn something around that.
Yeah, so I think my whole thing is there's a recency bias. You remember the thing that you should remember. You don't actually remember what happened. Like I don't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So like, how am I going to tell you but I heard this company went for 3-month-long journey to like, I might have heard about you from a friend, and then I might have Googled you, and then I might have seen your ad. I'll probably remember the thing that was most recent in my memory. I won't remember all those other things that might have happened. And I think I think asking anybody who fills out your form how they heard about you is kind of like too much. What I used to do, and what I still think people should do, and what we do as well, is like ask people on a call, like, hey, how did you come across this? Like you get them on a call, on a discovery call, or understand their customer journey, yes. But I don't think we should narrow it down to a single field on a form that is like the holy grail. Now we're gonna base on this. And like we ran an analysis, and if anybody listening to this wants to volunteer their data, we'll happily run this analysis for you too. But we ran this analysis for one of the companies we work with, and we compared around like 700, 500 records. So it's not a big data set. But a lot of the times what people said they heard about you was like 70% was like search. And that's what HubSpot cookies told us to, was like 70% of people are coming from search. Now there's the difference in like paid search versus organic search. HubSpot could tell us that split on how many people came from organic versus how many people came from paid search. But like when we ask people, they're like, we found you through Google. Like, that doesn't help me at all. Or like there's also this, it happens a lot, is like people will just pick the first thing on the form. So like you're not running billboards, but you have the first thing on your form is billboards, and they'll pick the billboard. So I think it's like relying on human memory is always fallible. Like you don't want to ask, like you're trying to I think what that does is like it tries to compress this. We talk on one hand, we talk about how complex the B2B buying cycle is.
Mhm.
On the other hand, we're saying just ask people how they heard about you, and that's your answer right there. And I'm like, that
Contradicting
like
stuff.
conflicts with these. Yeah, contradicts itself. So yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think we we also do. I think we have a similar take over here at Revenue Hero. Yeah, we look at HubSpot's original source, the latest source, and all that stuff, right? But along with that, I keep asking our sales folks, like, please ask
Yeah.
them on the call where they heard about it. Like, it doesn't have to be very direct either, like, but it can be casual. Like, if it's
Yeah.
part of the conversation, like, definitely bring it up, right? And probably the biggest pain for me is like going through the calls and just noting them down
Yeah.
every single day.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest pain. And I guess that's also what led everybody into this journey of like, okay, hey, this is like really painful to monitor and all stuff. Let's go ask them. We are asking them on the call directly. Why not just ask them on the phone? Right? That's my
Yeah.
theory. But so anyway, the way we sort of try to think about it is like, sure, there's the HubSpot version of it, but whatever our prospects or customers are saying on the call is sort of, if they say for example, LinkedIn ad, right? And if it doesn't match with what HubSpot is saying, the theory that we are taking is, okay, whatever they saw on LinkedIn probably had the most impact on them, right?
Yeah.
That's what they can
Yeah.
remember. It
Yeah.
had significant impact on them to make them remember about us for how many
Yeah.
other days or how many other hours before the call, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
I like.
we are.
I also think when you ask people, you get more rich information. Like you ask them in a conversation, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was talking to a friend, and then I saw this, and then and you get much more of the context behind their decision." And I think it's better to use that call to discover what was their jobs to be done, what was their trigger to buy, like get much more rich information rather than, hey, how did you hear about us? Okay, that's my version of truth. I'm gonna spend 100% of my budget there. And I think I like the framing of like LinkedIn had the most impact because like that's what they remember. I love that. But like that also doesn't mean if they didn't say LinkedIn, it doesn't mean you're gonna stop running LinkedIn ads. Because intuitively you know LinkedIn ads work for you. So like there's that, like if out of 10 calls, 6 people don't mention LinkedIn, would you stop running LinkedIn ads? I don't think so. Because they kind of know LinkedIn ads work to a certain degree. So like there's also that. Like what do you do with that information kind of a thing? And I think it goes back to attribution is viewed as I'm a marketer, I need to justify my existence in the company, not as I'm a marketer, I need to understand how this customer came to this decision to come talk to us.
Makes sense, yeah. And I think probably that also comes from the worldview of like, hey, marketing is probably it's probably the team in the entire org that probably spends the most money, right? So especially if the leadership team is viewing marketing as a cost center, that's probably where a lot of the problems start from, right?
Yeah. But also marketing is creating future customers. So like that's what I tell our customers, that's what I tell everybody. Like if you stop spending on marketing today, you're not gonna have pipeline in 6 months.
Oh, there was the other thing that I remember. I think he posted this about a year ago, probably a year ago, about how you're using DataBox to sort of do your reporting and all that. From your perspective, right? Like, how do you tie the qualitative data, probably sales folks asking questions on calls and things like that, along with the numbers, the data-driven approach?
Good question. We're not doing that right now, but that's why we hired Betty. So Betty is on our team. She comes from a customer research design background, and she's bringing that more of a qualitative side to the equation. Because traditionally we've been very like, what's our number? But we haven't dug into the story behind the numbers. Like, who are these people? What are they buying? Where are they coming from? What's going on in their lives? Like, we haven't looked into that. We haven't done a lot of qualitative stuff. And that's the direction we're going in right now, where we're doing more competitive research, we're doing customer research, we're doing market research, we're doing customer calls, like we're going in that direction slowly. Because I think that's an important part of the equation that we're sorely missing in the work we do. Because performance is not just about raw numbers, it's also about what drives people to these decisions and all that stuff, and understanding the larger context behind that.
With the customers that you work with today, do they sort of like bring that perspective with them?
Some do, some don't.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the maturity of the organization, some people have a really strong product marketing function that brings that insights. Some people don't, and then we try to fill that gap for them. So we'll be like, oh, we need to understand the market landscape. You guys don't have the bandwidth. Give us some context, give us some customers you can talk to, and we'll do some desk research, third-party research, and first-party research, and put together like a market landscape document that also informs our paid media, SEO, whatever creative strategy. So like, for example, the work that Alhambra and the creative team does, we looked at competitor ads and like what the industry as a whole, what are their creative concepts like, what are specific competitors running. So we do some of that research before we start designing ads or landing pages or other creatives, because you can't just create them in a vacuum. Like you need to know what other people are doing around you. So one, you can stand out. Two, you can understand what the industry is like.
Can you talk a little bit around, like you mentioned, you talk to potential customers and then sort of like figure out, okay, where to put in money, like do we spend more on certain channel and probably content or SEO or whatever channel, right? Like, can you talk a little bit around that process that you typically use over there? Because I think that is sort of important today, right? Like, because it also ties back to the entire attribution thing, because today, from what I understand, from what I'm seeing, right? So it's mostly like, okay, hey, our dashboard says that we got 70% of our customers from Google Ads. So 70% of the budget goes to Google Ads, right? So it's sort of that very single dimensional approach that a lot of people have today. So trying to understand a little bit around like what your approach, what your thought process is around that.
So a couple of things there. I think, yes, 70% of the revenue is coming from Google Ads, but other channels are probably influencing a lot of that. So we try to dig into that. Second, when we do competitive or market research, we get a lot of insights on copy, creative, keywords, campaign, what have you. And then we use those insights to inform our performance marketing strategy. Mm-hmm. So we're not doing your positioning and your messaging, but we're using the research as a conduit into a better performance marketing strategy. So it might be like people love this certain feature about this certain product. Let's highlight that feature more, because we haven't really we're talking about the product as a whole, but the market really likes this specific thing it can do. Let's go market that more because that's what people like. Mm-hmm. Or they talk about this problem in a certain way, but we've been talking about it in a different way. Mm-hmm. Let's talk in the same language that they're talking about. Or if we're doing competitive ads, people hate this thing about this customer. Let's, leverage that to. So then we work with a HubSpot competitor, and HubSpot is making changes to their partner programs, and we capitalized on that to run some ads saying, hey, if you're a HubSpot agency partner, you're not happy with these whatever changes are happening, come work with us. We're more agency friendly. Blah blah blah. So I think you need to understand the broader market landscape and what's going on in the market to be more effective at your demand gen strategy or paid video, whatever you call it.
I think one of the things is also mostly around okay, hey, we know certain things are working for us, right? Certain campaigns are working for us. Let's try to, in the name of trying to scale that, it's mostly things like, okay, let's see if we can find more such keywords or more creatives and run it with different audiences. Maybe it'll start working with that audience and that sort of stuff, right? So I think this is sort of a slightly better and a more
more holistic. That's what we call ourselves. Nobody likes that word internally. When I say holistic, everybody says we're not holistic healers that use gems, whatever. But going back to the fundamentals of who are we trying to reach? Why would they buy? Let's dig into that so we can create more effective campaigns versus just hammer nail analogy. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So like you're a hammer, you think search works and you just want to keep hammering on the keywords, whereas it might be something else.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy. Nice.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Cool. Moving forward, thinking a little bit, you know, from a long-term perspective, I think the browsers are now starting to strip away the click IDs and all that stuff, right? Like, given all this and everything that we've talked about in terms of attribution and all that stuff, like, what do you think is sort of like the future slash landscape going to look like for B2B marketing?
I think a few things. One is the ad platforms like Google, LinkedIn, Facebook make billions of dollars from ads. So they'll figure out to model this via machine learning or something. Like there's people much, much smarter than you and I working on these problems.
Yeah.
I think there's a joke in Silicon Valley that and during a certain phase, all the smartest engineers went to work in ad tech because that was like the hot space. So like, yes, there's a lot of fraud and blah, blah, blah. But I think like even with iOS 14 and Facebook, it's come back.
Yeah.
Like it's not as big of an issue as it was. Like people were in panic, but Facebook figured out a way to do something. I think the other thing is that we'll start to move away from single channel, this channel drove this, to more holistic view. Again, I'm going to go back to holistic, but like blended on a blended basis, because we don't know if this person came from Google search or LinkedIn or something, but like on a blended basis, we put this much dollars in marketing, here's our fixed costs, what do we get out of it? Like I think we'll go to more of that kind of measurement, because a lot of times people might click on an ad, but then the shop is direct and the cookies are blocked, blah, 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 blah. So I think, and then we'll move into more of the marketing mix, experiments, turn off certain channels, see what the impact is, run certain channels in a certain location, see what the impact is. Let's do some lift studies, let's do some brand lift studies, let's do some channel lift studies. Let's create some let's model out this data and see what we expect. And if we do that action, does it actually hold true or not? I think we'll move into more of that.
Interesting. Yeah. I can already see a lot of people trying to spend more time in multiple channels. And I think, like you said early on, right, like it was predominantly just Google ads for a lot of the business. I think that's still
it's still true.
Right. Yeah. But I am seeing a lot of my friends are now starting to seriously focus on other channels, right? Like, and also events is now like definitely people are investing a lot of money there, right? So in-person events, all that stuff is now coming back. So that makes a lot of sense. The marketing mix model, I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely want to talk a little bit about that.
So marketing mix modeling, I'm not an expert. Michael Kaminsky runs this company called Recast, Michael Taylor, who runs WexPower, Rick Suford, who runs Mobile Dev Memo. Like these guys talk about this a lot. And they come from more like B2C gaming, mobile apps, that kind of stuff. And those are the big spenders. Like compared to that, we'll be spending like 1% of money. But I'm still learning this. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. I'm like, we have an analyst who does the modeling for us. I don't do it myself.
What was your learning in the experiment that you did?
Right, and we'll have to look out for the essay that's coming out soon. So.
Oh, okay.
I'm not gonna spoil it.
But I think either way, when it comes to you definitely need a bunch of data, like a whole lot of data than most companies have today, right? And I don't think it's probably it isn't that straightforward for most companies.
You need at least like 6 to 12 months of data, because the more data you have, the more accurate the model is. Basically, you're creating a model that explains the data. So you're putting in different variables and you're saying, if I do this and this and this, does that explain the data distribution? So the more data points you have, the more points in the graph, the more easier it is to like draw a line through them. But I do think like even if you don't have so much data, you can still do some basic correlation analysis on when I spend money on Google, does my organic traffic go up? What's the correlation coefficient for that? Is it really high? That means yes, there's a high correlation between when Google ad spend goes up, direct goes up, or whatever. or it's a low correlation, that means that there's no relationship. Again, that's not absolute deterministic, whatever, but it's just like you're just saying there's 80% chance that these two things are connected.
Yeah, makes sense. Got it. Cool. Anything else on just the topic of attribution? I feel like we covered it pretty extensively.
No, I think just like don't overcomplicate it. I think too many people overcomplicate it and they want to like twist themselves into a hoop to understand what was that thing that drove this person to purchase. I mean, look at averages and just make your decisions based on the best data you have. There's no perfect solution. You'll never know exactly what drove someone to purchase. We're all trying to like solve probabilities at this point.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting. Awesome. Cool. Before I let you go, I like to do a quick fire round.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's a tactic or a channel that is seeing work really well, but a lot of people don't know or use it well?
I think offline, like billboards, events, like those are underrated. I think more people should use that because they can be incredibly effective.
Who are some of your favorite marketers that you think our listeners should?
Tara Robertson from Chili Piper. Pep Plaza, Brian Balfour. There's too many. There's a bunch of smart people.
Awesome. Where can people find and connect with you?
Twitter, LinkedIn. And Threads. I'm on Threads too now, so you can find me on Threads.
Are you active there?
Like once a week.
Okay.
Twitter becomes too much of a weird place to be, and then I go to Threads.
Okay. Nice. I try to get into it, but I don't know. I just didn't find anything interesting over there. So yeah.
It takes some time to build your follower graph.
Feed the algorithm.
Yeah. There's a couple of people on Twitter that stopped using Twitter and now they only use Threads.
Oh, okay.
So I'm there just so I can follow what they say.
Oh, interesting. Thanks for hopping on the call, Kamil. And
yeah, my pleasure.